Welcome back to the Fight for Your City podcast, and I've thought the last few episodes have been a bit serious and everything, so I brought on the least serious person I know, and Marc Grimes. Marc, tell the people where you're pastoring at.
I pastor in Spurgeon, Indiana. It's a little church in the middle of nowhere, so we're out in the middle of cornfields, just outside Oakland City and Linville, Indiana.
If you're a Baptist, you're very familiar with churches out in the middle of nowhere, because
Yes.
that's most of us.
Yes.
But man, one of the reasons I want to have you on the show, for one, you're a funny guy. When I used to go, when I was in Oakland City, we would come to your church occasionally when I wasn't speaking somewhere. And I was like, oh my word, this guy actually knows how to be funny, and it's not awkward or forced or.
Don't ask my wife though. Sometimes it's awkward and forced.
I get glares from my wife too all the time.
She doesn't think I'm as funny as everybody else does.
I was emceeing at a wedding the other day and cracked a joke, and she gave me the glare the other day. I was like, oh no.
Her favorite question is when people say, it must be like a total comedy routine every day with him. And she's like, oh yeah.
I have a memory from when I was pastoring in Louisville. I was really young. I think I was like 22, and I'm sitting down and we're eating lunch with some church members after church, and one of them makes a TV reference that I'm way too young to get. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I don't get it. And she's like, what? And I'm like, she's like, oh, she goes, I'm sorry. I forget you're so young just because, you're just so wise. I saw my wife hit the hardest eye roll I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, me, that's my gray hair. So I'm only 22, but it's ish.
I've never seen someone use touch of gray in reverse.
Yeah. Well, it's so people will think I'm wise.
But I think a big reason I wanted to have you on is a big topic that exists in a lot of churches nowadays is called church revitalization, church replanting, whatever, comeback churches, whatever you want to call it. And I think that your church is not only an example of it, but also you're an example of doing it the right way.
I appreciate that.
And I say that because I've known churches that have done it the wrong way.
Yeah.
A lot of churches I think we can think the formula is we're going to buy a bunch of lights. We're going to have all of our worship people be young and wear flannel shirts. And we're going to change our church name from First Spurgeon General Baptist Church of the Lake of Holy Fire to 2 words, and we'll be good.
Yeah.
But y'all actually took the approach of not just coming in and bombarding it, but we're going to be a part of the community. We're going to be a part of our church, and we're going to grow the right way. So I just want to ask you, when you were setting out on this, what did the right way look like?
Honestly, I had a conversation with Ray Barber, Dr. Ray Barber. He was a campus minister at the time when I was a student in Oakland City. And I was kind of navigating out of a church. I was the campus minister there. I was working with college students, and I just knew it was a time of transition out of that church. So I was kind of looking for maybe a pastoring position. And Ray had told me about Spurgeon, and he said, they just need somebody to come in and love them.
Yeah.
And that has been my mantra for the last 22 years that I've been the pastor there, is just to come into that church. How do you love these people, regardless of where they're at in their life or their faith journey? And people will ask me, because they've seen our church recently in the last 4 or 5 years, and they're like, man, what's the formula? What do you got to do? And I'm like, dude, I pastored this church for 18 years with 30 people in it.
Is that something people have actually asked you? What's the formula?
Oh yeah. Like, what are you doing? Like, well, what's the progress? And I'm like, I don't have anything, dude. I'm literally loving people, So for us, one of the greatest benefits, with all the negatives that happened through the COVID season with so many churches, and my heart goes out to, I had so many friends that, had their pay had to be cut by 25 to 50% because the budget shifted and changed. Our church did the complete opposite. Throughout the course of COVID, our church gave away $25,000 because people were just sending us money that were watching us online. We had never been online before. I had a gentleman from Wisconsin sent us a check for $5,000. I had people in Flint, Michigan sending us checks for $500 here, $500 there. People writing me checks. I'm like, I do not send me checks. If you want to give money, give it to the church. And so our church just kept bringing in money and money and money. So we just started giving it away to the community because we know the community was hurting. And so one of the benefits for us is that we ended up going live. So all the people that I've built relationships with over the last 22 years that were aside of the church, said they never stepped foot in the church, began to get a glimpse of what does Spurgeon look like. And so they were like, there's still people that had been watching for 4 years and have never stepped foot in the church. but I'll see them in the community and they're like, oh yeah, we watch you every week. And I'm always surprised because I'm like, what are you watching every week for, But it's kind of been a gateway for people to kind of come in. So people who are far away from the church have kind of come into the setting, and it's been, golly, the biggest blessing for me. I mean, this feels like the best season of ministry, but there was a process of getting to that point too.
Yeah. There's a lot you touched on there. If you could move your microphone a bit closer to your face just for a moment. But, before I get into, obviously, I think there's an adjustment to blessing. Yeah. That sometimes we don't realize that blessing also comes with responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
And that can lead us into some weird areas. Some even more stressful areas.
For sure.
I think a prophet once said, more money, more problems.
Pretty much. I remember that prophet from the 90s.
You were actually alive. You were actually alive for the prophet.
Big deal.
Notorious deal. Yeah. But let me go back and say, when you first started there, what were some of the immediate challenges that you were met with when you started pastoring?
Honestly, I was 22 years old. And so you jokingly said that about your wisdom. I thank God that I've always been an idiot in my life, but for some strange reason, as a pastor, I feel like I've been given more wisdom, and I've kind of benefited from that because I came into that church just saying, hey, listen, this isn't my church. This church was built in 1889, and I pray to everything that 500 years after I'm dead and gone, this church is still going. So I've never came into it saying, what do I want out of this church? And so kind of navigating some of those kind of things of like coming into a setting, coming into an established church of like, this is what they do, this is what they look like, this is what they are, and kind of like submitting to that at some level and saying, okay, I'm gonna let these people be what they want and then see how they want to grow. So anytime anybody kind of came up with anything, whether it was, hey, let's change the music, or let's do some, video stuff, and let's do some PowerPoint, then I would just run with it. I'm like, hey, it's your idea, let's go for it. But one of the biggest struggles was how does an established church take a 22-year-old kid and take him serious? So when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, the first response was, okay, where are you going now? And I was like, what do you mean? Are you telling me something here that I don't know about? And they're like, well, no, we just figured you were here just for your undergraduate degree and then you'd leave us. Because that's what they were used to. Pastors would come into Oakland City University, they would come and pastor that church, and then they would leave to go on to the church that they wanted to go to. Yeah. And I told them, well, I came here because I felt called to be here. So I went through seminary. When I graduated with my seminary degree, a number of people would say, okay, where are you going to go now? And I said, I feel called to be here. Like, this is where I feel God is going.
Are these people in the church?
They were part of the church. Yeah. So I think that was what they were used to. They were used to pastors coming in for 3-4 years and then leaving. And so before me, the longest term pastor was 8 years. And so I remember talking to the head deacon saying, hey, I'm going to be here for at least 9. I want to be the longest term pastor. 22 years and counting later, I want this to be the last church I ever pastor. And so, but I think one of the biggest challenges was just kind of trying to navigate, like, how are you a kid and then trying to help these people who have been studying the Bible a lot longer than you have. You may be more educated than them, but these people are like passionately living this thing out. And this is their church and this is how they're owning it. And then trying to just kind of like help them come to the place of like, okay, what is Jesus wanting for our church? Not necessarily what you want or what your family has wanted. I think that was one of the biggest challenges when I started in ministry.
So kind of taking them from a point of, doing church on Sunday to then what does it look like when the Spirit of God actually moves us to move outside of the church building? Yeah.
And one of the first things that I did, to kind of like, okay, this is who we are, is we canceled church on a Sunday and went to our neighbor's house. She was a single mom. Her upstairs didn't have windows. Her front porch was falling apart. Her ceilings were collapsing. And I told the church, hey, listen, we're going to go be the church. It's not about what we're doing here on a Sunday morning. So we canceled church for a Sunday morning. We had church at our neighbor's house and renovated her whole house, put windows in there, fixed her front porch, painted, did her landscaping, got everything up to code. So that was just kind of like one of those moments where it was like help the church to realize like it's more than just sitting here and singing some songs and listening to me preach. Let's go be the church. And that's kind of been our stance for the last 20 years.
So what led to that culture? Because I think that's where a lot of churches get stuck at. I think it leads to a lot of frustration with pastors is, yes, you will come to church on Sunday, you'll even tithe, you'll go to Bible study, but they just feel like they can't ask much more than that out of their people. So what did you do to kind of lead that culture shift into to people being willing to go out alongside you and serve their community?
Yeah. I think, I don't want to say like, oh, look at me, I'm the example. I don't ever want to come across as that, but I've tried to live my life in a way where people can say, there isn't a person that attends our church that wouldn't say the Marc Grimes that you see on Friday is the same Marc Grimes you see on Sunday, and the same Marc Grimes you see on Sunday is the same guy you'll see on Tuesday. That dude is who he is. Mm-hmm. And so I live my life in a way where like my ministry is just a reflection of who I am as a person. And so for us, even as setting up the structure of the church, the church talked about doing renovation projects years ago. Oh, we want to get new carpet. We want to get all this new stuff. And, my response was, well, how much is it going to cost? Mm-hmm. And we came up, it was like $15,000. And I said, if we're going to spend $15,000 just so we don't have pink carpet anymore. I mean, the carpet was pink, it wasn't, but it was still functional. There wasn't anybody that came in our church. It was straight up from the 80s. Nobody came in and said, this church is ugly. Everybody's like, this church is so beautiful. And it was pink pews, pink carpet, pink everything. Man. And I said, I just don't feel comfortable spending $15,000 just for our aesthetics. I said, but if you want to spend $15,000, then you need to spend $15,000 in the community. Mm-hmm. And so after COVID, when we gave $25,000 out, they said, well, we need to get new carpet, and our pews were falling apart, so we need to get new chairs. So it ended up being about a $16,000 project. And I said, well, it's okay, because we just gave away $25,000, so we can spend some money on ourselves. So I've just made it a mission of like 50% of our stuff's going to go in our community. So like if you live in Spurgeon and you don't have water, you're going to have water because our church is going to pay for it. If you don't have electricity, our church is going to pay for your electricity.
You see, that's so interesting because so many churches, their model of doing business, I guess you can say finances, if you will, is we'll give to the community once we have our stuff figured out.
Sure.
Like,
sure.
Like, to many people, carpet is more than aesthetic.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's aesthetic, but to many people, it's more than that. Yeah. But we have to get this done. We have to have this done. The parking lot's got to be repaved. Yeah. All this has to be done before we can give out to the community.
Yeah.
And so you think that they're actually hurting themselves by doing that because they're not able to do the ministry that God is actually blessing them that they can be able to do. But let me ask this then. I kind of come from this place too, where I actually worry about the church giving away a lot sometimes, because sometimes it can create a cycle of reliance instead of financial freedom, which I think we all agree what we want for people is financial freedom. We want to help you to get to the next step that you can actually, not just that. So, maybe one day they'll pay us back. No, it's not about paying you back. It's that we want you to be free from that, financial slavery. So many people find themselves in. So what did you ever receive pushback like that?
Yeah. And a lot of your giving? For sure. And it's even a struggle for me too, as a pastor, like listen, I try to be as generous as I can. My wife always jokingly says, if Mark's got $100 in his pocket, he's going to give it to somebody. Cause that's how it is. If I got money in my pocket, if it's cash, I'm just giving it away to anybody. Cause it burns a hole in my pocket. So I'm like, it feels like free money when it's cash. My debit card's different,
Yeah.
But like, as far as for me as a pastor in the community, I do struggle sometimes because I don't want it to be, and let's go, for example, our neighbor, that we took off the Sunday and we went to help. It got to be to the point where I felt like maybe we were doing a disservice because I was helping her so much. Yeah. And so what I ended up doing was we got her a car. And, I said, well, why don't you make payments for the car and I'll help you with those. It got to be a thing where it was easier for us just to pay for the car as opposed to like trying to help her out in that way. She ended up moving, so it kind of took care of some of those things. But that was kind of a thing that to me that I thought, how can I better help her to understand? Maybe how can I help her so she can help herself too, as opposed to just being hey, this guy's a cash cow, for lack of a better term, Yeah. But I think for us, I've just made it clear, like, hey, if there's a need in our community, it's our responsibility to help those people. Like our church doesn't need to have something but then I'm not going to say that this is the model it's worked for us and our setting, but we're also at a point now where we're thinking, what does the future of Spurgeon look like?
Yeah.
What does the future of our church look like? I mean, we are at capacity. You know, we have no parking spaces.
Yeah.
And we have no facility for our youth. And so it's kind of like, what do we need to do about thinking about planning for the future, which is a struggle for me because I still want to just be like, hey, just give it all away, you know?
Yeah, especially, I would imagine the church has been probably debt-free for a long time. So even that, whether you do that or not, is horrifying to people. But I agree that there's that struggle of making sure the community's taken care of, but then, you know, making sure you're taken care of. But I mean, I'll say this. I've almost never seen anybody, I think I've yet to see a church that gave themselves away into foreclosure.
Yeah.
To put it like that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen generosity kill a church.
Yeah. And I think, you know, listen, before COVID and after COVID, two totally different churches.
Yeah.
So we probably only have maybe 15 people pre-COVID that we had before. Everybody else is brand new people. The 15 people that were there before COVID have seen the generosity of the church throughout the years. And so they've been able to see, man, the more we give away, the more God gives to us.
So you think kind of COVID provided almost a breath of fresh air into the church in some ways?
Yes. I mean, it revitalized the church. It brought people into the church that had never been part of the church. You know, I still remember, you know, a good buddy of mine, he said before he came to our church, he said, I think I've been in church twice. And he's my age, you know, 22 years old or 44, whatever.
How'd you get connected with those people? Was it just...
I was friends with everybody from Linville.
Okay.
So all these people who are now a part of our church, I've been connected to them through school, through sports, through just being a community leader there. That just decided, hey, through COVID, hey, we'll, you know, during COVID, everybody was watching churches online, you know, and then some people just decided, hey, we'll try this out and we'll show up. And so these people just started showing up, and it was amazing that when we kind of had a little, I would say, a church split during COVID. And I remember thinking, oh, what are we going to do? And that week that the people left was the same week 4 new families showed up, and it's just been a constant thing since then, you know?
Wow.
And so I think it was really, I had another pastor friend of mine say, maybe God was waiting that he could trust you with the church, you know? And so, you know, it may have taken 18 years for God to finally say, okay, Mark, I can trust you with bringing these people in. But, you know, you mentioned something a little bit earlier about like the weight that you might feel from kind of the new growth. Man, I feel that every day.
Yeah.
You know, I feel the weight of like these people's, I don't want to say their eternal souls or anything like to that magnitude, but like I had this huge responsibility of these people trusting me enough to try Jesus out. Yeah. And I've had people say, the only reason we go to Spurgeon is because we love Mark, we trust him, and we know that he will not harm our children.
Yeah.
You know, he's not going to do anything, because they've been part of churches before. They've been part of pastors to just say things that they don't like, or they're judgmental, or they're, you know, it's just kind of exhausting to deal with. And say, they come here, they're like, Mark loves us outside of the church, and we know he's going to love us inside of the church.
Yeah. I think a lot of that goes back to what you said in the very beginning about the attitude that you had going into the church. This isn't my church.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, when I was a young guy, and, you know, I felt this before, there's this thing that happens where when you go in with that mindset that young and old pastors do, where like, I am the identity of the church rises and falls on my back.
Oh yeah.
When it rises, it feels good, but man, when it fails, and when you're revitalizing a church, you fail a lot. It just crushes you. You take all that fault on you.
Oh yeah.
So I actually think that mindset, it probably saved you to an extent, and saved your ministry in the church.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had to resign the church during COVID. Wow. And I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I told the deacons at the time, I said, if I had my own home, I'd be gone today. But the thought of my family being homeless right now is concerning, you know, and they both said, you stay in the parsonage as long as you need. If you want to be done this week, you can be done this week. We love you. We are so grateful for the 18 years you've given to us. But if it takes you 2 years to find a home, you can live in our parsonage. And I said, that's nice to say until you hire another pastor who needs a place to live. Yeah.
What'd that conversation look like then in the process of stepping back from that?
Stepping back from that was an awareness that if I left, there would have been some shifts being made that I thought everything that I worked for 18 years, the love that I poured into that church was going to be negated. And I had a conversation with she was the pillar of our church. She just passed away last month. And, you know, we sat in her living room. Her husband was my lead deacon, and we cried together, you know, and they were surrogate parents to me. I live 500 miles away from my family. So these people had been raising me since I was 22 years old, and we had been through so much together. And she looked at me and she said, you know, our church has started over with 5 people before. Mm-hmm. And if it's the right 5 people, I said, we start over again. And I sat on that for that whole week. And I stood up at the church that Sunday, and I was very transparent with the church throughout this whole season, you know, and I stood up and I said, I want you to know that I resigned the church last week. And I told the deacons I was done, but I'm here to tell you, I'm going to see the church through this next season, you know, and I want to see what God is going to do with this place. As a result of me staying, we did have some families leave. There was just some disagreements on things, and it was scary because they were really the leaders of the church, and so it went from like us having this is our core to our core leaving, and wondering what is the church going to look like. Yeah. Like I said, that next week, boom, boom, boom. It's been a constant. It was like God blessed people leaving, and then He has just blessed people coming.
Wow. Yeah. How do you rebuild leadership after a season like that?
So that's where we are right now. So that's been kind of the biggest struggle, because it would be one thing if, you know, if it was a lot of transfer growth and you've got people who have been established Christians for so many years and they're kind of used to navigating these things. But we have a church full of people who are still, we have a large number that are searching still. So we are just now, after this process of saying, okay, we need to get ourselves a couple more deacons. We need to kind of figure out who's going to be leading our teams and who's going to be doing this and that and the other thing. So that's what we are actually doing right now. And I'm in the talks of talking to a couple of people about, hey, do you want to take on some leadership positions here? So I see in the near future, we'll have a couple more deacons coming on, just because the church has grown so much that, you know, we went from a church of 30 people to now we're at 170 people every week, but we have 250 people that consider that their church. So on Easter, we had 250 people and only had 7 people that were first time visitors. And so, you know, our church is it's a young church, a lot of people with young kids that are in athletics. So there's this 100 that fluctuates every other week, you know? So it's been, I don't want to say a blessing that it's kind of been a constant like that, but I mean, there'll be weeks you have 190 and it's like, we can't set everybody.
Yeah.
So trying to kind of figure out what's that next season. So I think the next season is we always have the kids up for worship and then they go down for children's church.
So whoever the next leaders are going to make some of the biggest decisions in that church's history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our deacon because now we only have one deacon, and he had told me, I've been looking for property, you know, try to figure out, well, what are we going to do with the future of this church? He said, and he's 75 years old, and he said, but that's not my decision to make. You know, I can't make that decision for the younger generation of the church. And I've got so many other people in the church saying like, hey, there's this church that's available for sale. There's this. So like everybody's thinking about it, because it's a reality. When you come into the church, you're like, where are we going to put other people? Yeah. And we probably have 25 people who consider that their church that are not comfortable coming because it's so full.
Yeah. And that's a thing I've actually heard about from other churches, even here in Evansville, is that, we can't get a spot. And I've heard this from people too. Some churches do overflow rooms. Yeah. Where like, hey, you come to this room. It's like a mini sanctuary and it's on screen. Yeah. And guys tell me, and I just think I can't disagree with them when they say, if I was going to watch it on a screen, why would I even come?
Yeah.
You know, because I'm like, I have a hard time disagreeing with you on that. Yeah. But obviously we say like, okay, the importance of the church is not just the hearing of the sermon, the songs, it's the being a part of that community. Yeah. So you want people to be there, you know, if they're starting out, whatever, I'll watch online, but we want you to be there in person if you can.
And we've talked about, hey, do we do it at 2 services?
Yeah.
The problem is that everybody that comes to our church wants to be in church with the people that we are there with. I mean, it is a community church. These people all love each other. And so, I mean, we even have a sign that when you leave our church says God loves misfit weirdos, because that's what we say about our church folk. Because we're just just a group of misfits that God has brought together, and it's such a beautiful thing.
I think that's, I've kind of spent the last year looking around and visiting different churches, speaking at different churches. And I kind of asked myself this question. I'm like, what makes some of these churches successful? And I think at the beginning I was looking for that formula. Like we talked about, like what was the thing that's been missing from so many of these churches that I visited, that I've pastored. And honestly, the biggest thing that I've seen isn't really a formula. It's not that the way that they do music or the type of preaching that they have. It comes down to community. Yeah. I went to a church just a couple of weeks ago. Music was just okay. The preaching wasn't really, crazy, explosive, dynamic, whatever you want to call it. But this church is packing out 3 services in their building, hundreds of people that are going there, just a small little community church. But it's that community. Yeah. When they do a greeting time, people know each other. They're talking to each other. They're invested in not just their lives, but in the other people's children's lives. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing I've seen when I go to some of these churches. I'm like, man, these people, it's not just that their relationship is beyond just fellow church member. Yeah. They're actually viewing each other as family. Yeah. And you see it in churches that, have buildings that are super old school to super modern churches, to churches that are out in the middle of nowhere. Oh, yeah. You're like, man, it makes no sense why this place is doing so
Exactly,
good.
Yeah.
They're not following the formula. Yeah. They don't look like Elevation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But man, there's something so profound about that. And I think that sense of authentic, real community, people who genuinely love each other. Yeah. And I think want to have a relationship with each other outside of the church building.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think that's to me been seriously one of the biggest blessings. Like I remember, my father-in-law comes down and he'll go to the kids sporting events, and I remember kind of the church started kind of growing, and I was sitting at a basketball game, and I was just like, oh yeah, they go to the church. And then I started counting all the kids and all the family, and I told him, I said, man, there's a lot of people that our church is their church. And so to me, it's been nice that I've always been a part of the Linville community through the kids' school and all those kind of events. But now I'm a spiritual leader for the Linville community, and so like now when people see me out, it's not just like, oh, there's Mac's dad or there's Mia's dad. It's like, oh, there's Pastor Grimes,
Yeah. And here's the thing. I think a lot of pastors forget that they are community leaders at the end of the day. I've known a lot of pastors who, to them, being a full-time minister meant full-time at the church. Yeah. That they need to spend 40, 50, 60 hours in the physical church building, even if there was no one there. Oh, yeah. I once heard about a young pastor. He told me the story about, he was pastoring a church middle of nowhere, and he would get all his stuff, like preparation stuff, done by about Tuesday. And he would just sit there for 3 days, just waiting to see if someone came by, if someone called. And his thing is like, we have cell phones now. Yeah. And also, people will call you. But like, there's an importance that we do need to be out in the community, meeting new people. And I've had conversations with people about, that's actually a huge strength of bivocational ministry. And some people, they don't like bivocational ministry because they want to be a full-time pastor. Yeah. They don't want to have to do another job, being a bus driver or something, substitute teacher. I was a substitute teacher once. But here's the thing. When you do those things, what are you doing?
Yeah, you're right in the community. You're part of it.
Yes. Yeah. You're meeting, kids in your community. If you work another job, you're probably working with adults who aren't saved and who aren't going to church. Yep. Like, you're getting out there and you're meeting people where they're at. Yeah. And, I've even experienced it myself where I became people's pastor when they weren't even attending my church, just because that was the only pastor they knew. Oh, yeah. And if they would have had someone die in their life, if they were getting married, I was going to be the one they called on because I was the only one they knew. Yeah. And I think it also, when you go into certain areas, I don't think you experience as much in Linville, but in Evansville and other big cities, you definitely do. A lot of people have grown up with awful views of what a pastor is. Oh, yeah. And I've had people tell me, like, you're not like any pastor I've known. Yeah. Because they think, well, they're supposed to be that, like the people you talked about, judgmental. Yeah. They're supposed to, stick their nose up at you. Yeah. They're supposed to appear to be wiser. But when you can just kind of be a normal guy around them who also, does have that wisdom and spiritual authority, it changes their concept of what church is, of what Christianity is. And I've had people who've their whole life, they stayed away from church, but man, they were willing to come because they just got to know me. Yeah. And they had a different concept of it. They saw a different aspect of church. Oh yeah. Beyond just the judgment and the hating and all that. Yeah. That's what people often say, you know, they're just kind of like, hey man, like you just seem different than what we're normally used to. Yeah. And I always say, like, listen, there was a lot of things in seminary. There's a lot of time, you know, Dr. Barber is a member of our church, you know, so there's a lot of times they'll say, like, you know, I was told not to do this in seminary, but you know, so like there's a lot of things where, I mean, I had a professor tell me, you know, don't be a confessional preacher, you know, and I'm a confessional preacher, you know, listen, I'm like, I'm on the same struggle bus as you guys are, you know, like I'm a flawed human being just like you are, but like, we got to figure out how do we do this thing. You know, I had a professor tell me, do not get too connected to your people because they're going to hurt you. Yeah. And remember, I'd rather have my heart broken and pour and invest into people's lives. And at the end of the day, my heart gets broken as long as I can somehow plant the seed or water it, you know? Yeah. And they would tell, we share a lot of the same professors, not all of them, but some of them. And, you know, I was told too, like, don't tell personal stories. Yeah. Like, don't, like, you know, even go as far as like make up that it's someone that you know or something. Yeah. And I get that. I think probably the lesson they're trying to tell is don't get too reliant on it. Yeah. Because some guys become too reliant on it that they got one. They essentially have their testimony. It's the only sermon they ever preach. Yeah. But here's the thing. I've seen it in people, you know, when I've pastored them, I've talked to them, they connect to those real stories. Oh yeah. And it humanizes, you know, you in their eyes. Yeah. And it leads to that, you know, connection of trust. Yeah, for sure. You know, when you could actually see that, wow, they're a husband who says dumb stuff to his wife sometimes. I never have. No. I'm sure you have. Often. they're a dad and their children are horrible. Maybe I have that too. Pastor kids. Yeah. But like, there's so many times I'll tell a story in my sermon and people say like, man, I same thing here. Yeah. You know, and I'm like, those are the connecting points of what I feel like my job is to like, hey, let me be vulnerable. Let me be open. Let me be honest. And let's try to figure out how we're going to continue this journey together to become more like Jesus. Yeah. You know? And I think too, it kind of comes from a place, there's a joke I heard a comedian once say, they talked about, he was Irish and he was Catholic and he would talk about the priest. He goes, you know, nowadays we get all of these priests where all they've known is the church and, you know, they give these boring homilies and all this. No, I want to go back to Ireland where my preacher had one arm and an eye patch and talked about going through the war and what he's explaining is, you know, we're getting all of these guys, they've had no real life experience. Yeah. I want someone who's actually done all the things that they're now preaching against. Yeah, for because it gives it's that authenticity. Yeah. They know what they're talking about. They know what failure looks like. And that's been a thing too. Like even just being in ministry is like people will say, well, you're a pastor, so you don't know what it's like to, or you know, you've been in ministry since you're 22, so you don't know what it's like to. And I'm like, no, I have a past, you know, so I am not the kind of guy that gets up and tells every bruise and battle and scar that I have, but I am very transparent to say, listen, you know, from the age of 12 to 19, I made a lot of dumb life choices and I made a lot of decisions in my life that I'm grateful that I'm even still here for. Like I made decisions that were not pleasing to my parents or to God and made decisions in my life that I regret. But at the end of the day, it has created who I am today. Yeah. That like when I see the people coming into my church, you know, that are lost and hopeless and helpless, I'm like, man, I was there. Like, I know what that's like. I know what it's like to try to like find the void and fill it with something else, you know? So, I mean, for me, I always try to think, I don't want to forget what it was like to be lost and hopeless because I want it to be that place of like, hey, man, I don't know all the variables of your story, but some of the key factors are the same. Yeah. You know? And I think people get lost in that. Even pastors who have a past and come out of that past, they forget what it's like to be a non-believer. And I've actually seen sometimes where they lose the love for non-believers. Oh, yeah. Because they become more of a nuisance or a disturbance. Yeah. Or a project, rather than, man, this is a human being that Jesus died for. Yeah. And they're coming here for help. And I think a lot of it is probably the pressures of ministry too, of like, hey, you know, I got to fill this budget. And to fill that budget, I got to have people who are established in church who are going to give and who are going to support. I've never done it that way. I still remember the first
week that I was at the church, we had a treasurer, and, she asked me, she said, hey, how often do you want the reports on who's tithing? And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, our pastors have always wanted reports on who's giving, who's not. So then you can see when somebody stops giving us, oh, I don't care who gives in this church. And she's like, well, you don't want to know when somebody stops giving? I said, no, I don't care if somebody gives $0 or $1 million. I'm going to be the same pastor for them. And so I don't want to know who gives, and I don't care. And, and so for me, I've been that way for 22 years. I mean, I'll tell people I've never preached a message on tithing, because I tell people everything that we have is a gift from God. God has given to us. So if our church is doing stuff that you love and you want to support, we welcome you to support it.
Yeah.
So we can do a lot more together than we could be separately. So if you want to support the ministry, if you want to support the community work that we do, your name's on that check when we send a check for Spurgeon General Baptist Church to the community. That's you sending that money out. It's not us. So I kind of try to help people understand, that's the mode of giving.
And it can lead you in some really bad things. I think I've actually seen where it can lead to bias.
Yeah.
It leads to bias of, the concept now becomes, how do I keep these people pleased?
Oh, for sure.
Instead of preaching. I knew a pastor who would have frequent panic attacks at the idea of a key tither leaving.
Oh yeah.
Come in freaked out at the idea of him not liking this or him moving or something like that. And I'm like, bro, it's like, God will take care of you. Yeah. He's going to take care of you. It's going to be okay.
And that's hard in the moment. That's hard in the moment.
Because that's your salary. Yeah. That's where it's connected to.
I remember COVID when we had all of our issues. I remember thinking, I'm going to be paying the church's light bill, their water bill. I'm going to be the one financially taking care, because I'm bivocational. So I'm like, my wife works, I work. I don't need the salary from the church. We can cut our budget back and live on macaroni and cheese and grilled cheese sandwiches. And I really thought that's where it would be. So when the church just started rapidly growing, I mean, the word I kept using was faithfulness. I'm like, man, God is so faithful to us.
And it took, 18 years is a long time to get there.
Oh yeah.
That's a path that I've always said, along with, I think, a big thing, if you want to boil it down to a formula for church growth, I think it comes down to having a real authentic community among your people.
Yeah.
And then having a pastor that's willing to be there for the long haul.
Yeah.
Because when I see a lot of churches struggle, it's the churning of pastors, right?
Oh, yeah.
Every 2 years, 4 years, whatever. But then when you see pastors really kind of lock in and say that I'm gonna be here through the highs and the lows and listen to my people.
Oh yeah.
When you put those two things together, I think a church almost becomes unstoppable in that way.
Yeah. I have so many people that will just be like, I just know that you care. I get text messages constantly, just I feel so blessed that you're in my life. And I'm always like, no, I feel so blessed that you're in my life. And I genuinely mean it. It's not just pastor talk. I'll tell the church every week, I love you guys. I'll tell every member, I love you. I give everybody a hug every single Sunday. And, a guy that started coming, he said, I've been watching you, and I noticed you physically touch every single person in that congregation, letting them know that they're loved. Mm-hmm. And he asked me the week after that, he says, what do you do with the money? I see they bring money up. What do you do with that? Questions I never thought about, because I was raised in the church.
Yeah.
So that's been one of the challenges of the church now, being of people asking these questions that I've never even thought of, how come you do it this way? Why do we do this? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess I got to think about these kind of things now.
I think that leads up to the question I've been most excited to ask you since I asked you to be on. At my core, the thing I love most to do is preaching. I love it. But one of the struggles I've seen that's happened in our culture now is that there's this kind of balance that I've not really seen be balanced too often. Yeah. Where pastors are super heavy on theological head knowledge. Oh yeah. I went to a church a few months ago, and they had said, we're having a guest speaker today. It's this young man who's getting his master's at Southern Seminary. And I was like, oh boy. Because I was like, all right, I know what's coming. And I kid you not, the opening words of his sermon is, I know sometimes we just get so fixated that we can't figure out the proper theology and how it wraps into our eschatology and menmonology and navigatology. And he hits him with 5-6 words. About 5 of them I knew. And And I'm looking, and like, you know, there's people that are like, yeah. And then there's like the young people that are just like,
what?
Like, what's he talking about?
Like we were when we first listened to Dr. Loud talk.
Yeah. What's this dude talking about?
Yeah.
But then there's kind of this other side where it is a lot of, I don't necessarily want to use the word fluff, but it can be.
Yeah.
It can be almost, it's like, man, it sounds more like a self-motivation than, you know,
a TED talk or a sermon.
Yeah, a sermon. And, you know, yeah, there's a lot of practical life application that's great in there, but I'm not really connecting the Bible to this. I'm not really becoming deeper in theology at all. And you've had that opportunity where you've had to ride that line.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have had at the same time brand new believers in your church, along with seminary professors and some of the smartest men that we've ever known.
Yeah.
How in the world did you toe that line every Sunday?
Listen, I was called a heretic a few times. Oh man, I tell you what. But you know that I still remember it was a Christmas service, and I was talking about how God wraps Himself in flesh, and I come down after the sermon thinking that I just preached the best sermon of my life, and Dr. Danny Donovan said, "FYI, that's heresy." And I was like, "What? What's heresy?"
He didn't drop it on you right after you stepped down.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Did he want you to immediately run back up there? I'm like, I have a correction. No,
I corrected it the next year and every year since, that God literally became a human being. It didn't appear that He was. To be honest with you, during that season of my life, I was also the campus minister at Oakland City University.
Yeah.
So we would every once in a while have guest speakers come in, and you've got all the theology professors and you've got students who are seeking. And I had so many people who would come in to guest preach for us, and they would say, man, I'm not comfortable doing this because what am I going to do? Like, we got theology professors in here. And I always tell them, if your goal is to impress a theology professor, you're going to fail every single time.
Yeah, you can't impress them.
Your goal should be for them to walk out saying, I didn't learn anything new, but I definitely didn't learn anything new, and not some new teaching out there. So for me in the ministry, listen, I was blessed with having Danny as a part of our church. He's got a PhD from SLU, and I mean, he is a legit theologian. He's the real deal. I've got, Dr. Barber, who was the president of Oakland City University at the time. I've got them two sitting in the church. But probably the biggest blessing was how gracious those men are in my life, that they loved me. They cared about me. And so, they probably a lot of times would be like, oh, okay, I don't know about this guy. And so I think, to bridge the, how do you preach to a brand new believer and how do you preach to a seminary professor? You come to the place of knowing that I have to reach that new believer in a theologically sound way where my seminary professor is going to walk away from that saying, I'm proud of him.
Okay.
I'm glad he did that.
Yeah.
And I always talk to Danny too. Like, hey man, how do we, what about this passage of scripture? How would you view that? Or I would say, hey, listen, in my commentaries and my study this week, this is what I found. Like, man, that seems like crazy. I love that idea. What about this angle? And he would say, I'm not sure about that angle. I goes, well, it sounded so cool. I thought this can't be right. And so like, I would always bounce ideas back, with him. But, I just kind of fully embraced it, knowing that these people who are highly educated love me. The coal miner loved me. The brand new Christian loved me. And if I can preach a message from my heart that I feel like God has given me, then I feel like the Holy Spirit's going to work that out in every single one of their lives. Yeah. That's truly how I felt, And so I say one of the biggest blessings that I had was having Danny as a part of our church, because it forced me to be theologically sound. I'm not saying, listen, Danny, because if Danny were here today, he'd be like, well, I remember this sermon, that it was, but it forced me to do my studies and do the hard work of like, how do I bridge that gap? But yes, make this applicable for these young people that have no idea who this person is.
Pastors are the hardest audience to preach in front of. Yeah. Because I think just about all of us, when we sit down and we hear something, you're like, I wouldn't have said that. Yeah. I would have said it differently.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't know. He doesn't he doesn't know historically what that was.
Yeah.
And
Have you ever preached a sermon and didn't think at the end of it, oh, I wish I'd have said this, or I wish I'd have done that?
Oh, every time.
Oh, every time.
I've looked down, I'm like, man, I missed a whole point.
Oh yeah. Or you're just like afterwards, like the Holy Spirit reveals something to you and you're like, oh, that would have been really powerful to say. But then you just have to fully embrace with like, this is a time constraints that I have.
Yeah.
And this, because you've probably had this experience too, where like people come up to you afterwards, like, oh, thank you so much for that message. This is what I got out of it. And you're like, that's what you got out of it?
Well, I've told this to people too. I'm like, if there's 100 people in front of me and I'm preaching a message, I'm preaching 100 different messages.
Oh yeah.
Because each one of you you're dealing with that, but you're dealing with it in a different way.
Yeah.
So if I preach a message on, about, let's just say the prodigal son, some of you are taking, away that powerful image of salvation.
Yeah.
Some of you are a literal prodigal son who hasn't talked to your parents in a while.
Yeah.
Some of you are parents who are praying for your children who you haven't talked to them in years.
Yeah.
So each person's taken that away. And
Yeah.
I once preached a sermon, it was at the start of the year one year, and it was about, it was actually about dieting, and it was about our relationship with food.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to one person, they heard it and they told me, I've never heard a sermon about it in my entire life of being a Christian.
Yeah.
And it taught me a lot.
Yeah.
Another person, talks about their journey, told me about their journey with, their weight and their stuff they've gone through and using as a source of comfort.
Oh yeah.
And then I had a woman come up to me who said, that week, you didn't know this, no one else knew this, but a week prior, I was told by my doctor that, to get through this illness I was doing, I was going to have to give up all gluten and basically all carbs. And I didn't think I could do it. Yeah. And then that message was preached that Sunday. Yeah. And it gave me the courage to live a better life for me and my family by doing that. Yeah. And I was, not knowing any of this, right? Yeah. But just, through me speaking, God is then speaking to them in different ways and how it's impacting their lives differently. Yeah. And also, there's just times you preach about stuff and, it doesn't hit with people. But I also think, too, a lot of it comes down to attitude, or what some people call positioning of your heart and your mind. If you come into church on Sunday and are like, man, I hate this series. Like, I'm getting nothing out of it. Yeah. I saw they posted their set list for Sunday. I don't like these songs. I don't like when this guy sings. He's way too emotional in it. And, I really hope, this doesn't happen today, blah, blah, blah. But then you compare that to someone who says, you know what? I don't know if I've really liked this series that much, but I'm going to come today with the expectation that God's going to teach me something. Yeah. And even these might not be my favorite songs they're singing today, but I'm going to listen to the words a little bit closely today, that maybe I can have a better understanding of what they're talking about in the worship of God. Yeah. So I think that's the thing when you get guys like Danny and Ray, I'm using their first names. Yeah.
Well, and that's how we talk about them, and it's,
Uncle Danny and Uncle Ray. Yeah. But, those two guys are just so spiritually mature on top of being so incredibly smart that I know that they're coming in with those attitudes too of it's not about me. Yeah. And I think that's the big thing in our churches is there becomes like an us and them paradox of we were here before this pastor started, and then compared to the new people who just got there, and we're mad because the attention's not on us anymore, and the preaching isn't for us, the music isn't for us. But rather when you preach with the attitude where now you become more of a servant. Yeah. To the new people, bringing them up instead of making it a war between us and them. Yeah, it's all the difference. Oh, yeah. Carrying in that attitude, it transforms the way you view your Sunday service. Oh yeah, where it'll literally take you from it being hit or miss, and you're constantly talking about leaving the church, to then I'm enjoying every Sunday. Yeah, because I'm coming in with the right perspective about how I'm supposed to worship today.
Oh yeah, and to me, I feel like that's pastor in the pew, like. I don't want to take weeks off because I love these people so much. It is revitalizing to me to go and preach every week. Mm-hmm. Like the thought of being off a week is like, I want to be with these people. Like I literally want to be with these people on Sunday, and I'll get those messages from people all the time. Like, I can't believe we found you guys, you know? And I'm like, I can't believe we found each other. And I always talk about, like, out of all the variables that all of us came together and became Spurgeon General Baptist Church is very slim to none, you know? And so we use the term gratitude in our church all the time. So we have to be grateful that God, for some reason, brought us all together, and therefore we're going to be grateful. And I'm like that as a pastor, because I thought, man, I couldn't imagine my life without these people in there right now. Like, they make me who I am now. And so, you know, it's a church I want my kids to be raised in. It's a church that I feel safe in as a pastor, but I know more importantly, it's a church that the people feel safe in. Like, there's no condemnation there. People don't come in and say, oh, what about that person being here? You know, we have a lady that she contacted me, and when she first started coming, she said, Pastor, if you don't think I would be a good example for people to come in, then I won't come to your church. And, you know, she's had a past. And I said, you know, if people come into the church and they don't want to be there because you're there, then we don't want them here. You're God's people. You know, and not to say that people aren't welcomed at our church, but if people are going to come in and say, well, if they're here, I don't want to be here. Yeah. And that's just never been the case. And that's what I've told her. And she has to be reminded quite often of saying, like, hey, listen, you are who you are, and God loves you. And people are so grateful they get to come to this community and be part of your church, you know? And so I've never wanted to have a church where people felt excluded from. Yeah. And I think that for the first time in my ministry, we have a church where everybody feels like they belong. Yeah. Like, and I feel like everybody feels grateful for it. Like, we feel like we keep pinching ourselves. Like, is this real? Yeah. When are we going to wake up from this?
Did there have to be some tough conversations for people to be that way?
There was tough conversations in the in-between stage. Yeah. And so those tough conversations forced people to leave. And everybody that stayed was the same. Hey, we want this church to be a place that people who are really far away from God are going to feel comfortable coming into, you know? And there's this division in the church, you know, in pastoral ministry. That's, you know, how do you preach? You got to preach the judgment. You got to preach, you know, God is not happy with your sin, or God is, and that's just never been me. You know, I always try to tell people, like, hey, listen, there is a better life out there, but you're going to see me live it. I still remember being called into the ministry, and I was working construction at the time, and I was, you know, working with a hammer, and I hit my thumb, and I said a word I shouldn't have said. And I looked over the guy and I said, man, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And he said, dude, I say worse things than that, man. I goes, I know, but I'm trying to be an example for you. Yeah. And he's like, oh yeah, you're fine. Another coworker that same week said, Mark, I don't know what you have, but I want it. I don't know what's in your life, but I feel like I need it. And that was my opportunity to say, man, it's Jesus, dude. Like, Jesus has radical, because he knew me before. I mean, and I was, you know, we're talking 3 months after my radical lifestyle change, you know, and so he's like, I want whatever you have. And this guy's struggled with substance abuse issues. And so just to be able to have those conversations of opportunities, that I feel like that's what I'm still doing 25 years later down the road, is to, like, I want people to see my life and say, man, that dude's life has value. Why is that guy living the way he's living? Why is he happy? Why does he have joy in his life? Why does he have peace that passes all understanding? And then I get to share with them about Jesus. I'm not the out front guy to be like, you need Jesus and you need to give your life to Jesus. I want people to be like, what does Mark have? And I feel that's the church we have now, is people have been like, this dude that I've known for years, I'm going to try what he's trying. Yeah. You know?
And I think that is what brings many people to church, is the outward example of joy, of peace when everything's going wrong, of wisdom. Yeah. You know, it's like, man, where are you getting this from? Yeah. Because everyone I know is miserable. Yeah. Everyone I know is panicking all the time. Yeah. You know, I definitely think that is what brings people in. I think the issue with sometimes the message of judgment, if that's all that church is, I don't think that there's many people out there who need a reminder of that they are very sinful. Yeah. And that something is wrong. Yeah. They know that something's wrong. Yeah. And also, I think the idea of for a lot of people, some people it's the only way to get through to them. But other people, if all you're doing is just up there and you're preaching against them by everything that they're doing wrong, probably 90% of the time, they're just going to ignore you and walk away. Yeah. Because you didn't give anything actually rational to their life, that it's like, wow, that was actually a good solid argument. And here's the thing, even if you put together a good solid argument, have Danny get up there and write a paper about something, it's not going to work.
That's why, like, in my sermons, I make sure I have a point. So, like, if you're going to listen in the first couple of minutes or the middle couple of minutes or the last couple of minutes, you're going to know what I'm talking about.
I actually started doing that too. I didn't like doing it probably years ago when I was starting out, because I like the idea of telling that story and keeping them hooked the whole time. And I felt like points got in the way of that. I actually still do think like points can get in the way of something, but I think it's important to have, I call them tweetable quotes. Like, can I post, could I just post this on Facebook and people get what I'm saying? I think it's so good to have those, because it speaks to people at a level all people are going to understand. They can take that and it's going to stick in their mind, and they can carry that with them the rest of the week.
I think one of the things that kind of got me on that trend is taking a parables course with Dr. Lau. How he's talking about, hey, there's a point to this. And the problem sometimes in preaching through the parables is that you're going to look to try to dissect the whole thing and make everything have a point. But the point of the parable is the point of the parable, not necessarily all the details of it, but how do you get the point of it, the overall theme of it? So that's what I try to do even in my preaching, is to say, well, Jesus told these parables for a reason.
And there was a point there.
And there was a point. The whole story is the point, not necessarily the details. So, like, I know from the beginning to the end, like, this is the point of this sermon, and I will just try to weave that in and out throughout the whole time. You know?
And I think that's the failure a lot of guys get into, even guys who have been around like a long time, consider themselves really highly educated. I still see it where they take a detail, and the detail becomes the sermon instead of the main point. You know what I'm talking about? I heard a guy the other day, he was talking about the story of the prodigal son, and this was a sermon he was preaching. In fact, he wrote a book on the subject, but it was talking about how the prodigal son is actually a story about therapy and family reunification. And that became the focus of it, instead of really what it was, which was the salvation. And, you know, there's other things too. Like, one of the things, it bugs me when people talk about it. If you disagree with me, talk with me about it. But, you know,
I'll talk to you off camera about it.
Right after we get done. But you know, the story of the prodigal son, one of the main character Jesus is actually talking about isn't the father or the son. It's actually the oldest son. And, you know, I heard a pastor once talk, he goes, I think he has a bad rap. I think he was in the right. And I'm like, nope, not the point. That's the exact opposite of everything that was being told in that story.
See, or for me, I think, is it the good father? Who, regardless if you're the lost one, he's there for you, or the one who's a righteous, indignant person who doesn't know what they should be doing, and he's there for both of them, you know. So that's kind of, but what that, you know, that's a very good example of a parable that I think 3 sermons should be preached out of. You know, the parable of the sowers. You know, I feel like there's a point to that, because even in the explanation of that parable, Jesus gives like, hey, this is what this represents, and this is what this represents, and this. So like, some of those parables do seem like, okay, maybe they lend themselves to more like dualistic, or got multiple points to this sermon, you know.
Because I think when I think about the prodigal son specifically, I think it shows 3 different characters who are playing 3 different roles in the story. The prodigal son to Jesus being the lost, the Gentiles, the father obviously being God, you know, wanting them to be home, wanting them to be in his good graces. And then you have the prodigal son, who's the representation of the Pharisees and the Sadducees that Jesus is arguing against. You're mad that they're coming home, when really an example that I take away from it as the older brother, if my younger brother Caleb left home, ran away, and my parents called me saying we don't know where he's at, then I'm going home to Arkansas to go find him. Right?
Maybe
I should. But the Pharisees, religious leaders of the day, wasn't it their responsibility to go look after everybody who had fallen away, to reconnect them with God? And they had failed their duties as, you know, the older sibling, the one with authority that God had given them, right? And I think those are the stories that I see come out of it. And one thing I see out of it is that the lost son it can go to the new people who are just gotten back in church. It's the lost people who are out there. And I look at the older son, I'm like, okay, that's easily something I could fall into, right? When we start making the church all about us and what we want, keeping our own people in, our vision, our way, our music, our preaching, our building, our carpets, all that.
Yeah.
Then we've lost our whole purpose in the world.
Yeah.
God called the church to be the ones who transform the world.
Yeah.
When I feel like so much of the time we find ourselves in this thing where the church almost becomes like a capsule, right? Like we're going to hold out on the world that eventually Jesus is going to come back and we'll be okay.
Yeah.
When really we should be concerned with, is my neighbor going to be okay?
Yeah. The prodigal son, I love that whole series. You've got the 99, Jesus leaves the 99 to go and search for the one, and then you've got the coins, and they lose that one coin, and that woman's got to find that, flips her house upside down. And then you've got the story of the lost son, so there's this, you've got 100 things and you lose one of them, and that one is important out of 100. You got 10 and they're important out of that one. And then you've got these 2 sons who are there, and that one is important. It's lost. Yeah. And to me, it almost kind of lends itself to saying, when you've got the 2 sons in the story, we're going to automatically assume it's the prodigal son that's the most important. This is the one, this is the point of the story. Instead of saying, man, that father goes and searches for that boy. And then you've got him going out to the porch to meet with his other son. Everybody, so it's kind of like one, and then it's like, actually he's just there for Errol, but all the kids, the dad loves all the kids. There's so much in that. Just preaching a series out of that whole chapter is just rich.
And the parables, one thing about preaching them is that they're so dynamic too, because you can take it just from at its simplest form. Essentially, have a young girl just retell the story in modern terms, or you can take it to the deepest depths. How did you balance that out, aside from just the seminary professors to the youngest people? How did you balance that out with, I've had people that have been in church their entire lives and read the Bible multiple times, to people who they know nothing, like borderline nothing about Jesus. How do you preach to both of those people to make sure they get the milk and the meat of the scripture? Usually,
when I do the meat, I mention the meat. If I go into some type of history or some Greek term, I will mention, hey, listen, I'm going to go a little deep here. I don't want to lose anybody, so stay with me for a moment, okay? Because I think there's value in this word. And so I kind of bring it up so that people don't get lost. If I get up there and start spitting some Greek terminology out there, the people who don't know it will just drift away. And so I'm very upfront about it every time that I do it, to say, hey, listen, this is what I'm getting ready to do. Just hold on. And I'll just say it in a way, in the simplest form that I can. And I don't go deep into hey, this is what all my commentaries say, and this is what my lexicon is telling me to do with this term. I don't do any of that, but I just try to say, hey, listen, the Greek language is so much more, deep than our English language, So we've got to understand, what does this term mean? Because it might give a whole new, the one that pops in my mind right now is, John chapter 3, is born again or born from above, and so kind of parsing that out and doing those kind of things, and just trying to help people understand, there's more meaning in this text, to try to help the person who knows nothing be like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
I think a big one I think about is talking about the 3 different kinds of love.
Oh, yeah.
And we talk about philo love, and we talk about agape love. We hear it a lot in church because it was so transformative when people heard it. Because I think people don't really understand love nowadays. They need to understand, all right, love is not just a feeling. It's not just attraction. It's not even really about liking anybody. That, there is this form of love that God has that is so unique that this word is, made for it, talking about God's love, but it's a type of love that is unconditional, that I can do wrong and he still wants me.
And for us, it's all context. So when I tell you, Jonah, I love you, you know that love is different than when I tell Emily, babe, I love you. You know, because of context. And so the Greek language helps us to almost a lot easily understand, hey, this is what this means, And
by actually approaching it that way, you're able to bring kind of everybody up. Like everybody kind of gets some information from that. And I think that is a big problem that exists in a lot of churches preaching, is the assumption of this knowledge.
Oh yeah.
Like you hear, it's any churches, it's Pentecostal churches, Baptist churches, Catholic churches.
Yeah.
You say these words as if people know what they mean, but we're now having generations of people such as, my generation, Generation Z, they may be 2 generations removed from church.
Yeah.
So their father, their grandfather, they didn't go to church.
Yeah.
And so you're having people who come in with no background.
Yeah.
They've not read the Bible. They don't know what the word Trinity means.
Yeah.
They don't know what Bible means, theology, eschatology, ecclesiology, all that. They have no idea what that means.
No.
They don't.
Nor do they even care.
If you mention John 3:16, they don't know what you're talking. They may not know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We even have a growing thing in this country of illiteracy.
Yeah.
People can't read as good as they used to.
Yeah.
And so I've talked with pastors about how do we make that change in how we prepare our sermons that it really can connect with everyone.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
I assume everybody in that pew knows nothing. And that's how I try to come to every text. Even like every other month, I even like when I say, hey, we're going to be reading whatever the passage is, John 3:16, we're going to look up John 3:16. And when I say John's going to be the name that's up on the top of your Bible. It's going to be the last third part of your Bible. It's in the New Testament. The Bible's split up into 2 testaments, and you're going to look for John. John's going to be that name. When I say chapter 3, it's going to be that big 3 in your book. And then when I say 16, it's that little 16 in the middle of that passage. And I've had people say, man, my kid really enjoyed you doing that, because they've always kind of wondered that, and so just even like those simple kind of things, but it's the nature of who our church is.
Did you have some people hate that when you started doing it?
No, I think even the people who knew it were like, this dude's doing this for a reason. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of church we have. I mean, we have a church of people who just like, I'm so glad he's doing this for those people who have no idea, who've never even opened a Bible. Yeah. I mean, we have pew Bibles, and I tell them every Sunday, hey, if you do not have a Bible and you need a Bible, you take that pew Bible. It's a gift from us to you. And so we have 172 seats, and they seat like pews. So we have 172 Bibles out there. And so we bought 172, and I've probably given away 150, and so we just, every couple of months, we'll buy 30 and just replace them, because we'll have people that'll like, oh yeah, I'll get this one. And so we've had a ton of Bibles being given away, and we buy a nice Bible, because we even when we discussed starting to do it, people are like, oh yeah, there's like $4 Bibles out there. I goes, there are. And we spend I think it's about $16, $17. It's a nice fake leather. It's large print. I mean, it's a Bible that you and I would want to carry, that we would want to preach out of. And I said, there's no sense on giving a cheaply looking Bible that's going to fall apart to somebody. If we're going to give them the Word of God, let's give them the Word of God that we'll be proud to carry.
You're almost bringing back that old culture of a family Bible.
Yeah.
This was my father's. This was my grandfather's. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome, man.
And those are the Bibles we bought for the kids and the children's ministry, so that if they take those Bibles home, they can all say, and I say every Sunday, hey, we're going to be on page 942 in your pew Bibles. So then they automatically go to the page number, instead of saying, go to John 3:16, because they're not going to be able to find that, But hey, this is where the table of contents is, but I'll tell them the page number that we're on. If you've got a pew Bible, it's on page 942.
And another reason I think that's so important is because I think for so many decades now, the culture of the church has just been basically preach it and they'll figure it out eventually. That I think there's people who've gotten lost along the way, that they've just kind of been tailed along. They don't know what these terms mean. Yeah. They don't know what this theology is. They don't know what these concepts are. And they've kind of just gone along with it because they're too deep in it. Yeah. You're too afraid to ask, right? And I've seen that. A story I tell is I heard about a guy one time. He was an older man who his pastor was visiting him in the hospital, and they end up telling him he needs to have a heart transplant, and they have a donor for him. And right before he goes into surgery, he tells the pastor, I don't think I want to have this heart transplant. And the pastor says, well, man, why? It's kind of a miracle. They've got this for you and all this. Like, why not? He goes, well, pastor, it's because when I was saved, they told me that I now had Jesus in my heart. What if this guy who I'm getting this heart from doesn't have Jesus in his heart? And this wasn't a joke. He was legitimately concerned, because he didn't understand the analogy aspect of salvation. And he was 70 years old.
Oh yeah.
Been going to church his whole life and just didn't get it.
Yeah.
I once had a conversation with a woman. She was mad. She was mad at me because I was pastoring a church and a guy had parked in like a driveway area that we didn't use. It was like gated off. So he'd like parked in front of the gate. And she was telling me I needed to call a tow truck and have his vehicle towed. He was our neighbor. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to. And she's just like, you're so soft on these people. I remember she told me that you're so soft on these people. They don't go to church here. They vandalize everything. Yeah. Like, why are you so soft? I'm like, well, because the Bible said to love my neighbor, to love everyone. Yeah. She goes, no, it doesn't.
That's wild,
now she's going to church like 30 years. I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't?
That's wild.
And she goes, it doesn't. I literally I had my Bible, I turned to it. I'm like, Jesus just said, there's no great commandment this, but the second is much like the first, love your neighbor as yourself. And I had to explain to her, because she had the understanding of neighbor being her family and her literal neighborhood. She lived by the church. She didn't think of it as being, I'm to love anyone that God has put around me, right? I'm to love all people. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm having to explain this to someone who's been in church over 30 years. Like, how did this get missed?
Yeah, for sure.
How did this key thing, part of Christianity, get missed along the way?
For sure.
I even had a conversation. Someone called me the other day. They actually FaceTimed me, so I knew it was going to be good. They're having an argument with their mom. And they said, when Jesus rose from the dead, did he physically rise from the dead, or was it just his spirit? And I was thinking, I'm like, I hear Danny like breathing down my shoulder right now. Like,
what are you gonna say?
Yeah, and I'm like, it was physical. Yeah, like they put his hands, in the side and his whole. And I ended up talking to his mom about it. And
he ate.
Yeah,
it's a physical.
And I'm talking with her, and she's just like, well, I just heard it preached in church like that, And I could tell, like, even though she was hearing it from me, she wasn't going to accept it.
Oh yeah.
So I did something a little bit dirty. Because I just knew this would kind of change her, get her unstuck. I said, yeah, I'm like, the concept of like a spiritual resurrection, that's like done a lot in like liberal churches that aren't teaching liberal resurrection. And she's like, well, I wasn't going to that kind of church. Was that bad of me to do, Mark?
Whatever it takes.
It was true.
Whatever it takes.
I didn't lie. It was true.
That's funny.
But that's like, I'm like, we have people who they've been Christians their entire lives, grown up reading the Bible, and they've missed it.
Oh yeah,
they've missed these key things.
I still remember being at the Christian bookstore looking at Bibles, and I had this lady. She was probably in her late 50s. And we're just talking. Hey, what Bible you looking for? Because I was in seminary, so I had all the answers right. Yeah. And I was going to try to steer her towards the translation I was using. And she said, well, I've been to church my whole life, but I want to be able to read the Bible that like King David, like when King David actually spoke, like I want that. She said, is that the King James or the New King James? And I just laughed because I thought she was joking, right? And I said, it's not even English. And she said, what do you mean? I said, you do realize like the Bible isn't an English book, right? And she's like, well, like Jesus, when Jesus spoke, it was English. And I said, no, Jesus didn't speak English. She said, how do you say that? All of our Bibles are English. I was like, but those are translations of the original text. She said, no, the King James is the original. So then that kind of like opened my mind. I was like, man, there's people out there that believe some of this stuff,
Yeah,
like,
they don't know. Did you ever see that video that went viral of it was like this independent Baptist pastor. He was a King James only church. He goes, the King James version's the only version. They're like, amen. He said, I can use the King James and correct the Greek. And the whole church went, amen.
Yeah. Or people like King James only 16:11. You're like, that's got the Apocrypha in it. I'm pretty sure you don't agree with that.
Well, I used to have this conversation with this girl in college all the time, and she was a King James only person. Her denomination was, and we talk. I'm like, why is this the only version you can read out of? And she said, because it was the first English translation. I'm like, no, it wasn't. And she goes, what do you mean? Yes, it was. I'm like, you're arguing with someone who's in school for this right now. No, there was a Geneva Bible. The reason that doesn't get used because it had Calvinist footnotes in it. And she goes, it's based off the original text. I said, all of them are.
One thing I learned from Danny is like in the midst of arguing some of those kind of things, use the word biblical because then they have nothing to go back on. So that's what I started doing. I'd say, well, that's just not biblical.
Even if it's not.
So, like King James only, well, that's just not biblical.
That's so amazing to me that someone would argue Jesus spoke in English. I'm like, was Jesus English?
Yeah,
and they might say yes, honestly.
But then that actually manifests itself in so many other problems. You know, I mean, that's, you know, there's just, you know, that's a whole nother podcast.
I know. I talked to Danny one time. I had just gotten out of, I did my final paper that I did for my senior year of undergraduate was based on Bonhoeffer's whole class on Bonhoeffer, Dr. Leidsey. And, you know, it kind of led me down this rabbit hole of, kind of like this problem with, you know, because a lot of Germany in that time, the Nazis, they were Christian. They were. I'm like, how in the world do you hate Jewish people this much?
Yeah.
When Jesus was Jewish?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with this? And apparently they had like hired some scholars who then presented like this theory that, oh, actually there were Germanic people at the time who had actually made their way down to that part of the Middle East. And one of those soldiers had actually slept with Mary. And so Jesus was actually white. I just heard, I'm like, people fell for it?
I need to hear more about that argument. I mean, the argument people makes are crazy.
But people fell for it.
Yeah.
They believed it. And, you know, I'm like, is there no critical thought or reasoning behind? Because, like, you know, we get in that argument about Jesus, you know, speaking English. I'm like, England didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
The people who made up England weren't even there yet for the most part.
Or the European portrait of Jesus. Is that what people literally like, well, Jesus is a white guy with blue eyes and blonde hair, and it's like, like I guess I wasn't raised that way.
Yeah, but
you know, I wasn't raised I wasn't raised in a fundamentalist home or anything like that. So it's like I've always been the one questioning things, and like my home was perfectly comfortable with asking questions about our faith. You know, so
I think that's the issue with a lot of churches, though, is that questioning is viewed as a sin.
Yeah, and
I even preached a sermon about it a few months ago. Doubt in itself isn't a sin.
Yeah,
John the Baptist had doubt.
Yeah,
you know, about what was that, because he sends people to Jesus like, are you the one we're waiting for, or do we gotta wait on somebody else? Like, doubt in itself's not a sin, but when we leave doubt unchecked, which I think happens in a lot of, you know, these churches, especially in fundamentalist churches, a lot of the time is questioning and doubt is viewed as sin and a lack of faith.
Oh yeah.
And so therefore you just have people who age out of church. They're 18, they move out and they never go back.
Yeah,
because they have this view of Christianity, right? And I think we have to be open to these questions. And here's the thing. I think our pastors have to be more educated now than ever. Oh, yeah. Because people can fact check us. Yeah. And they've really not been able to fact check us before. Yeah. But now it's easier to do than ever. Yeah. Like I'm not gonna lie, the other day I was hearing a guy, he dropped some Greek, and I'm like, I don't think that sounds right. And I Googled it and he was wrong. Yeah. You know? People can talk something about history, about, you know, Bible history. Yeah. I can look it up. See if it's right or wrong. Yeah. So we got to be on top of our game with our teaching and everything, because this young generation, you know, they'll eat you alive.
Yeah. Well, I even think, like, you know, thinking about doubt. I mean, doubt actually seems to me to be the presence of some kind of faith. Yeah. Like there is evidence of faith in your doubts.
And it's actually the opportunity to go deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, like it's always been my doubts and my questions that have created me to love Jesus more and understand him more fully. It's not been my assurance of like, oh yeah, I know this. It's been the stuff that I've had to struggle with and question and wonder, you know.
And I think it's a big part of pastoral ministry too, that I've experienced is I become the resource for people. Yeah. They have a question, they have a question about the Bible, about a hard topic. What does Jesus say about this? What does the Bible say about this? And you kind of just become that resource for people. And especially like in a church like yours where people don't have much background, I'm sure you're getting those questions all the time.
And I love them, you know, because people say like, well, I know I'm not supposed to. I'm like, no, I got those same struggles. Like I have questions all the time. I was like, if you think you have questions about God and the Bible, like I've got 1,000 more questions than you've got. And people want to know that you're comfortable with those questions and those doubts. I still remember being a campus pastor over at Oakland City, and there was a student who was, she professed that she was an atheist. And I had a conversation with her at the ping pong table, you know, and I think she was trying to kind of shock value me to see like, oh, can I get this guy all flustered, you know? And she had told me that she had a sibling who died when they were 3 years old. And she said, and you're going to sit there and tell me that God is good? And I just said, I'm so sorry that happened. And I totally understand why you wouldn't want to love God. Mm-hmm. I get it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you, oh, you need to love God, even though you've gone through such tragedy in your life. Like, that's not what I'm here for.
Yeah.
What I'm here to tell you is that I love you and I'm here for you. And I mean, she broke down. And 3 weeks later, she came to me and she said, I want to tell you something. You are the first Christian I have ever contacted that was not threatened by my questions.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm not threatened by your questions. Like, those questions aren't dealing with me. It's with God, and God has to answer those one day.
And I think, like you talked about before, the example that you set, we don't have a lot of peace in our world today.
Yeah.
When people get confronted with hard questions or skepticism, whatever, people, I think for young and old people there, you're immediately up with rage.
Oh, yeah.
That confusion that just leads to rage, and, well, you're this and you're that, leads to name calling and labeling. But there's something to be said that when you're faced with hard questions and you meet it with peace and understanding and just a glimpse of wisdom.
Yeah.
I even think a big thing in our world is I'm not even going to try to answer your question. I'm just going to listen to you at first.
Oh, for sure, man.
Then it's a stark difference between the light and darkness of the world that people are like, what was that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, the preacher said it, we're going to agree with it. We're not going to question it.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's like everything's going to be questioned. And if the pastor is not comfortable with being questioned, I'll tell people, don't believe it just because I say. If you want to do your research, a question, talk to me about it later. Like, I'm fully open to that. Like, that's dialogue, and the dialogue is going to help bring us to faith,
I know. I actually had a thing. I still have it. I used to say it like every Sunday, but it was like, if you have a question about what I say, please come up and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Or if sometimes there's hard things in the scripture that we don't necessarily just have time for in the sermon. I'm like, hey, if you're
confused, it might not be the place for it.
Yeah. Or if you're confused about this, come up, let's talk about it. I'd love to talk about it with you. I once had a sermon I was preaching, and I was preaching about Jesus, as we do. And
this one time I was preaching and I mentioned
Jesus. Shocking in this day and age.
You are a rebel.
When I was preaching, I forget, I don't remember the context behind this at all, but I had said that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. I said that because that was the region that he was living at the time. So it's this it's a scholarly term, right? They say Jesus was that. And I kind of used it in a sense too, that I wanted people, when they picture Jesus in their head, I'm like, he's Middle Eastern, right?
Yeah.
He is a Middle Eastern person with this darker skin and everything. I want you to understand his worldview is a lot different than mine and yours, right? And I say that to get that vision. And I see a woman kind of at the back of church. She was a young woman, and she ends up talking to like a bunch of people, and she's like running like back and forth, like in the back. And it's kind of distracting, but I'm just keep going on. She ends up sending me like this multi-paragraph text message about like me saying Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. Like, she thought I was being political. She thought I was being liberal and standing against Israel and all that. And I ended up texting back, like, here's what I'm talking about. There's these different kinds of, Jewish groups, today, the Ashkenazi, all this, ones that, look white like you and me from Europe, more based in Europe now. These people are based here. What I'm saying is Jesus was a Jewish person who is from this particular time, who had this particular, religious background, who had this, particular, regional dialect. This is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. It's a scholarly term that's been used for a long time. And it has nothing to do with politics. Yeah. And she still like went behind my back, like talked like trash about it. Oh, and you answer.
That's real. That stuff is real.
But you answer the question, and that's the thing is people will, sometimes will take stuff like that and, they'll put labels on you like, oh, he's a liberal pastor. Yeah. He taught me about how I can live a better life. He's basically Joel Osteen. And then, you say something else and you're like, oh man, you're so hard on us. People were crying because of what you said. It's
I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like and this is a gentleman who is still a part of our church. Mm-hmm. He came up to me after the transition of the church through COVID, and he apologized to me. And he said, I want to apologize to you because I have always thought you were a liberal. He said, I would walk out of church so many times thinking he's so political. And I was like, for what? And he said, well, anytime you talked about taking care of the poor, when you talked about like meeting the needs of people, stuff like that, like I just thought, man, and I said, he goes, I started reading my Bible a lot more, and I realized, the stuff he's talking is biblical.
Yeah.
And I said, because that's what I always tell people, like, I'm not being political here, I'm being biblical. So if I talk about being pro-life, it is not just a pro-life political movement, but it is, what does it mean to be pro-life? What does it mean to care about the fetus? What does it mean to care about the unborn? What does it mean to care about the elderly? What does it mean to care about people with health care? What does it mean to be, opposed to capital punishment? Or what does it mean about war? All these things are pro-life issues. But once you begin to say those kind of things, people begin to put a label on you. And I have fought my entire ministry of fighting any kind of political label. And I'm like, people say, are you Republican or Democrat? I'm like, well, I'm Christian.
Yeah,
that's what I identify.
Well, that's kind of like been the reputation of General Baptist.
Yeah.
For quite the long time was we're too liberal to be lumped in with the other Baptists, but we're too conservative to be with some of the other groups, right?
Yeah,
and that's kind of. But I often think like the right place to be is in the balance sometimes of both. And it's nuance at the end of the day. It's like I'm not liberal for saying that it's bad that innocent people are dying in war, and I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And people would jump on you and say, oh, you're this, you're that. And I'm not. I'm saying it's a bad thing that women and children are dying. Do you not think that's a bad thing?
But it's crazy to think, like, I seriously remember, even I don't want to talk about too many hot topics, but, when January 6th happened, we were sitting in a Sunday school class, and I just said, man, that's just crazy to think that, that this happened. And the responses of people, like it was a good thing, was extremely concerning to me. Yeah. And so I said something that I thought everybody would agree with, and I realized it's not. Talking about things like, when innocent lives are being killed in other countries for the sake of whatever war we're into, that's a problem, and that should be a concern for us. And when people respond by saying that's just a casualty of war, like it doesn't matter, I'm thinking, how pro-life can we be? How Jesus are we if that's going to be our response? Why can't our hearts be broken for the innocent lives that are being taken, And
I really think a big step that you have to take in your Christian walk is you have to view God's perspective, which is above you. It's bigger than just me. It's bigger than just my church. It's bigger than just my country. Like God really does love the world, and Jesus died for everyone, which means we're called to love and want to see everyone saved. And there is kind of like a selfish nature. It's always kind of been within the church. Right. And I just think it's how we as humans are. We want to view ourselves as the center of everything.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a huge step that, Christians have to take.
Yeah.
I actually, I'm reminded of it by your bracelet, your Honduras bracelet. I actually think it's a thing that every single Christian needs to go on a mission trip like that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just because of like the good that we can do by, building stuff and, helping with Sunday school and stuff like that. I think the real power of that ministry is getting people out of a first world nation and getting them physically in
100%
in a developing third world nation, whatever you want to call it. And it's like, oh my word.
Yeah.
Like, how blessed am I?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about all the gifts that God's given me, right? That I have been just holding on to myself. Yeah. When even the littlest amount of generosity is life-changing to someone else.
Yeah. And I mean, Faith Home, my life was radically changed after I went there when I was 19. I mean, I had been there a few times before, but when I was 19, something changed. I saw God moving in a different country, in a different language I had never heard about. And I thought, man, if God is this big, I want to be a part of what he's doing. Yeah. And so we just got back here a couple of months ago from Faith Home. We went over the summer. So I guess it's been a few months ago, 5-6 months, whatever it's been. But, the church, we took a group of 18, they're like, well, what are we supposed to get out of this? And I said, there's going to be a lot that you get out of this. But one of the things that I care about you understanding is like how big the world is. The world is not Linville, Indiana. The world is not America. and you're going to go somewhere else where you don't even know the language, you don't know the people, but you're going to see God working and God moving, and you're going to say, oh my goodness, how big is God? And you're going to realize that God loves us here in Linville, Indiana, and Spurgeon, Indiana, and Evansville, Indiana, and Indiana, and all across the country, you know, and all across the world. And so to me, that's kind of the perk of doing mission trips, is to kind of help you see, like, what is God doing in other spaces of the world? You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And to people who live in Linville, that might as well be the world for them, because they don't leave. Yeah. I don't know how they survive. I don't know where they get groceries.
Boonville. Boone Vegas, baby.
That's not a term. That is not a term.
I was told it was a term that people in Boonville use, but I'm not supposed to use it because I'm not from there. I call it Spurtucky though too, so I think the people in Spurgeon are offended by it.
Shout out all the people we know that live in Linville. But anyway, man, I want to do one more thing before I let you go. If you were given the ability to speak something into the mind of every pastor right now, what is it that you would tell them?
You know, honestly, love your people. You know, I always think, you know, I had a mother in my life who loved me so much. I knew, regardless of what I did, what I said, the mistakes that I made, that I was going to receive that love from her. And that has manifested itself into my understanding of who even God is. And I know that regardless of what I do, regardless of what I say, regardless of what I am, that God is going to love me. And I think if we as pastors can love people in that kind of way, not a, hey, I will love you if you do this, or I will love you when you do this, or I will love you if you change this. If I just love these people in the midst of their struggle, in the midst of their hurt, in the midst of their pain, in the midst of their sin, then I think that can be life-changing, because I have seen it happen over the course of the last 4 to 5 years in the life of our church, where I have just seen people's lives radically change because they're like, this dude loves me regardless. I got a text message on my way into here from a gentleman who's just recently started coming to the church in the last year. And, you know, he will, randomly text me certain things, you know, and he just said, man, I'm so grateful that you're in my life. Like, I know that you always are going to be there for me. And I always tell people, you need me at 3 o'clock in the morning, call me. I one time had a gentleman call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, man, I'm going to lose my job. I don't know what to do. We're going to lose everything that we have. What am I going to do? And I'm like, I don't know, brother. Let's pray. But I remember going back to bed thinking, I'm so glad he called me. I'm so glad that I'm a safe enough person in his life where he thought, 3 o'clock in the morning, I know that I can wake Marc Grimes up and he's not going to be upset at me, you know? And so, like, if we as pastors can begin to love those people the exact way that we feel Jesus has loved us, it can radically change their life. And I think in radically changing their life, it radically changes our church. And to me, that's what I've seen in our church, where we've got a church of people who I genuinely feel like every single person loves each other. I don't think there's a single person in our church that doesn't be like, I wish so-and-so didn't go here. You know, I wish they didn't come here. They're like, man, I'm so grateful we're all in this thing together, you know?
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, our church is just loving God, loving others, living it. And that's as simple as we do it, you know?
You heard it here, folks, people. That's the formula.
That's the formula. Bam.
Thank you so much for being on, Marc. I hope to have you on again sometime, bud.
I appreciate you, man. God bless you.